Welcome guys, gals and non-binary pals to Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, feminist and literary perspective. And boy oh boy do we have all three of those in this week's episode. My name is Joel, I'm one of your co-hosts, and with me as always is...
Brian. Hello, hi.
And today we will be talking about the episode of Season 2 of Buffy, Episode 15, Phases.
Yeah, so this episode was first aired on January 27th, 1998. It was written by Rob Deshotel and Dean Batali, who we've had before. They've done a couple of other things.
They're story editors on the series, I think.
Sure are. Yeah. Up until, I think, the end of Season 2. Mm-hmm. And then directed by Bruce Seth Green. So yeah. Hello, welcome, hi, how are you?
Ahoy, hoy.
How was your week? Was it good? Was it bad? Don't tell us. I don't give a shit.
Happy Pride.
Yeah, happy Pride. It's generally Pride stuff.
June is always Pride month, I think, internationally. Obviously, Prides are on different days in different cities.
Yeah, you see, this year Dublin Pride's on the same weekend as New York Pride, so I kind of feel like that gives us like extra legitimacy as a date.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That's good. So Dublin Pride March is tomorrow, which is good fun. There's lots of weird stuff around it. I think we've gotten very our generation about Pride these days, you know, because there's an alternative Pride happening this year because of, just in terms of objection to corporations taking over Pride and monetizing it and monetizing the pink pound.
Yeah, and the inclusion of things like the Gardaí, who are the Irish police, and also, I don't know if you saw this, the PSNI, who are the Northern Irish police, are also marching in Dublin Pride. And there's actually three distinct Prides. There's the official Pride, there's the alternative Pride, and also there's Trans Pride, which, while that's a kind of lateral Pride, it also has a position on the other two prides as well. So we're getting into this area where...
What's really awkward is that they're all happening on the same day and they're all like marching in like against each other and hoping to meet in the middle and start fighting.
So it's like the end of Mrs. Doubtfire, basically, constantly switching costumes in the bathroom between
indeed
one pride and the other. I always thought one of my favourite things about Mrs. Doubtfire, not to jump off the topic, is not, it's kind of a bit drag, but
there are great people in Mrs. Doubtfire. Harvey
Firestein he is incredible.
Yeah,
Mrs. Doubtfire is quite a complex film. It's quite a good film, but it's really all in service of that one farcical restaurant scene with Robin Williams constantly changing.
No, you're right in the sense that like it's a brilliant movie. It has great. It has great everything throughout. Like there's so many amazing scenes in that movie. Robin Williams is a powerhouse in it. I think it might be my favorite Robin Williams film, actually.
Fair point.
But yeah, you're right. It all culminates in that incredible scene where he has to play Mrs. Doubtfire and the father in the same scene. It's great.
Yeah, it tricks you into thinking it's a good film, but it's actually all just a setup for a joke.
That's how 90s films worked. 90s films was the last time that farce was a proper form of theater, and I miss it. I fucking love farce.
And this has actually worked out really well because I thought I was going to have to make a jackknife segue into our banter topic for this week. But 90s,
I have a note saying this is what it is for the week and everything.
Yeah, 90s films is actually a good segue. So we saw hot off the presses Toy Story 4 yesterday.
Yeah.
We will come back and talk more about Pride because there's more to say about Pride, particularly in this episode with a gay character. But I want to talk about Toy Story 4.
First explicit reference to any LGBT issues in this show, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting when we talk about it because Buffy, great, quite a fan of it. It does have elements of gay panic in it.
Yeah, it does.
In earlier episodes, there's been allusions to things which, while I don't think are textual comments, it's more just that it was a more okay thing to say at the time. And this episode has a bit of it as well.
We'll get back to it, but I think you have to look at Xander's reaction in this episode as being potential stepping stones for him actually having those feelings, because that is suggested heavily.
Sure.
And it was supposed to be a potential foreshadowing that didn't actually pan out.
Point. Anyway, I'm really excited to talk about that. But we will get back to it.
Toy Story 4. Oh, I loved it. I really liked it a lot. It was a solid 8 out of 10, which all the Toy Story movies are.
No, I'd never seen any of the earlier films, so for me it was kind of a real jumping on point.
He's lying. But you don't remember any of the earlier movies, apparently.
I remember them fine.
Okay, sure. But it was really good. What was really interesting about it was that the third movie was such a specific ending point. So the third movie had a really wonderful end moment, which was basically the toys get passed on to a new generation, which is Bonnie by
Spoilers.
Andy. Yeah, and it was really sweet. You know, I wept my fucking eyes out in the cinema in 2010. And and here we go again. And they decided to make a Toy Story 4, which I was really like, I'm not sure if that's a great idea. But it feels like just another ending, which was really nice.
I think you were quite a bit more vocal there when it was announced, like understandably so. And yeah, it was much better than it had any right to be. It was. I think it's interesting. I think this is something that I will vocalize on the podcast, even though it's a bit of a well-worn concept amongst off-air, but I do think it's worth verbalizing, which is that our generation, which is now mid to late 20s.
I'm just going to go to the bathroom, because when Joe says, our generation, you just know that you're in for like just a very...
I think you literally said that like 2 minutes ago.
A very annoying Twitter tirade. Yeah, I'm allowed to say it. You're not.
Okay. But our generation, there's not a lot of great trilogies and great long-running series left that aren't part of a franchise like the MCU, etc. But for our generation, I really do think more so than other people who might have viewed the Toy Story films, it was a really, really marked epochal time for us. It was, the films came out and touched on the issues which were particularly salient and relevant to people in our generation at the time they came out. Of course, the most significant, or looking back now, one of the most significant things being coming to Toy Story 3 as an ending when we would have been just at college going age, when we were the same age as Andy essentially, when he's moving on from these childish things, etc.
Well, yeah, like me and you specifically grew up in a generation that grew up at the same time as Andy. Like he tracked our progress.
Yeah, which is I don't think was fully intentional, but had the effect of it's up there for me with things like Boyhood or your Before Sunrises, Before Sunsets, etc. of actually really speaking to me at different times in my life, or representing different parts of life. And with Toy Story, having that ending, I think, is the reason why people who were like, what age we talking about, kind of 19, 20 at the time, bawled their eyes out, because it was so touched on having to actually let these things go, etc. Which is why Toy Story 4 was actually quite interesting, because as I ranted to you on the walk back from the cinema, Toy Story 3 was very much about everything ends and to be okay with that. And Toy Story 4, I think, is a much more relevant film for where we are now, which is, and also sometimes things continue, and sometimes things aren't neat and don't bookend, and sometimes they're just an ongoing, which is in itself a kind of ending, and that's fine. And there's a sense of, after the credits play, things continue, which is kind of where people really are now, I think, in 2019 in some ways, and kind of thinking about, outside of structured things, how do we continue to kind of construct our identity. Anyway, it's a lot of waffle from me, but I do genuinely think that it was quite a good addendum to it, and there should be no more of them, and that's it. Like, Toy Story 5 is not a concept I want to engage with.
They're already discussing it.
No, I don't agree.
We have to look at it. It's probably the best reviewed series of films ever. I can't think of any. Toy Story 3, when it came out, made it probably the best trilogy of all time in terms of critical reception, because fascinatingly, all three of those movies got basically 100% Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah,
they were universally just beloved. And then the fourth movie has gotten equally good reviews. Well, probably a little cooler, but very, very positive.
Could have been a lot cooler.
It could have been a lot cooler, yes, for sure. But yeah, it's definitely, I think, I can't think of any four movies that have gotten equally high praise as these have.
Yeah, absolutely. It was an interesting film, because I think even more so than Toy Story 3, it was very, I'm afraid of using terms like self-referential or anything like that, because I think they diminish the point I'm trying to make, but it was very aware of its own humour and very aware of how significant the films were to people, in a kind of self-observing way that the other films didn't have the distance to do. But it was fully aware of, the tropes it was playing on, and the jokes it made were the kind of things that people making jokes with Toy Story about for decades, all that kind of stuff. So
do you want to hear something disgusting? Sure. What this film was like, time-wise, was the first three films were Andy growing up, and the fourth film basically represents, it gives the audience the parental perspective, because it's all about Woody trying to take care of Bonnie and having to kind of move on essentially at some point. But it very much is that the whole film is about, you're 28 or so now, given that you went to college for 9 years ago. You probably have a kid who's around Bonnie's age, and wow, our dishwasher is
possessed.
But yeah, so Bonnie essentially represents the potential typical Toy Story adult who grew up with Toy Story's children, essentially, and it was put from that perspective, which is disgusting, and I hate it.
Yeah,
fuck off, jump into the river.
Well, we have a cat. I don't know if we mentioned him, but he takes a lot of taking care of.
He really doesn't. He's a really easygoing cat.
Where is he?
He was here 30 seconds ago.
Anyway, so we can also pivot from self-referential humor back into this episode of Buffy, which starts with one of the better continuity references in Buffy, and I think really indicative of where the humor goes later on. But it opens with Oz looking at the cheerleading statues, saying, "Have you seen this one weird statue? I feel like his eyes follow you wherever you go. I kind of like it." And it's obviously a reference to the third episode of the first series, when Amy, the evil witch's mother, gets trapped in the statue. So do you want to give us the Buffy Ann summary for the episode?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so Oz, bitten by a young cousin, becomes a werewolf and the prey of Hunter Kane, whom Buffy humiliates. Willow makes clear to Oz that his lycanthropy does not matter to her. Angelus starts his campaign of mocking cruelty against Buffy and her friends. That was oddly... It didn't describe any of the actual happenings of the episode.
Yeah, because it kind of varies, because sometimes it tells you everything happening in the episode, and that was the setup for the episode.
Yeah.
So it's fairly straightforward, and definitely a bit of a return to form after last week's concluding two-parter. But we have classic, really what is actually a classic Monster of the Week episode format. It just happens to be really significant for one of our main characters. But yeah, so Oz gets bitten by a werewolf in a very offhand way, gets hunted by Hunter Kane, who I'm pretty certain did a semester abroad from California and Trinity at some point. And we have various jokes around Larry, the school bully, and it turns out he's not actually a werewolf, he's actually gay. And there's a lot of text about misogyny and about sexism and about sexual abuse, actually, which I can remember specifically. So yeah,
which sexual abuse parts? What?
There's just a lot of stuff about let's say straight up Larry. There's a lot of misdirection in the episode that Larry, who has this very alpha male personality, is actually the werewolf, because they talk about how werewolves are an expression of our innermost toxic predatory desires. And so when he's perving on all of these various girls, he's looking up their skirts. He says to I think it's Teresa, who is the girl who ends up dying in this episode, in their self-defense class, I'm in your group, I may just have to attack you.
Sure.
And he grabs Buffy's ass at one point.
He does, yeah.
and says very sexually inappropriate things. So that's all sexual abuse or sexual misconduct.
Yeah, sure.
So it's much more direct than maybe they are with that kind of stuff usually. Obviously Hunter Kane is his name's not actually Hunter, he has a hunter called Kane. He has a weird first name, it's like Guy Kane or something.
Oh, weird. Okay,
it's in the script anyway, but he's just identified as Kane. But he obviously says a lot about how no wonder this town's crap, you only have a girl to defend it, and don't send a woman to do a man's job, and blah blah blah, kind of offhandedly randomly generated misogynistic lines. Yeah,
the masculinity is rampant in the episode for sure.
And we have the counterpoint there of Giles, obviously, as really, in terms of his character, really consistent always in these episodes of basically almost attacking this guy because he's been misogynistic to Buffy. We have Xander showing kind of unreconstructed kind of behavior in terms of his, he basically presumes that Larry is the werewolf and finds out that he's misunderstood the signals and he's in fact a closeted gay man, and he's uncomfortable around that. We have Oz as the kind of more modern reconstructed man, and kind of how he expresses that through finding out he's actually a werewolf. And obviously we have Angelus in a kind of a side plot, acting as the abusive stalkery ex, essentially, harassing Buffy. So it's all very much on the nose in a good way. It very much says this is what we're talking about through this lens of werewolf this week.
You're not wrong. I thought it was actually a reasonably deft handling of the topic of masculinity and expressions of aggression. I think the essentialist kind of perspective it presents as this is about how men are inherently violent is a little odd, because it's saying essentially that all men have this inside them and it's just waiting to burst out, whereas realistically it's not a natural thing. That's a completely cultured thing, that kind of aggression. So it's an odd one, because Oz so specifically in this episode represents that person who doesn't have that kind of toxic masculinity within him. He doesn't seem particularly... He's definitely not aggressive towards Willow. The whole issue in the episode is that he won't engage with Willow sexually or in a romantic sense because he's trying to I know, maybe respect her. I'm not sure what the subtext is there, but he's very much cast in this episode as being someone who isn't affected by those issues. And then to suggest that, within him there's actually this rampaging sexual beast is, for my money's worth, maybe just a little off in terms of the gender politics of the show.
It's a very interesting point you raised there, because it's something that recurs a lot in genre fiction, this concept of the inherent misogyny of man, essentially.
And we have to not forget, because what's happening in this episode is probably why you write this is to show that is as a metaphor for sexual assault and for the worry that women have to have going through life, and dating men, being attracted to men, knowing that there's so many of them out there who present as so shy, quiet and nice, and trying to be a nice guy who likes to rape people. So
sure, but I think the key turning point here, the key fulcrum, is whether you're talking about this as all men have the potential for this or all men are repressing this. And I think that's a really important distinction. So I think in terms of the gender politics of the show, could say that any man under, as he said, the specific, obviously certain inherent traits, but also certain upbringing, certain circumstances and nature versus nurture and all that, anyone could potentially be threatening. I think that's a reasonable point to make. And I think to abrogate that point is to wander towards maybe focusing on the minority over the majority, in the sense of almost near a not all men kind of territory, which you want to avoid. But I think it is 100% fair to say that it's not.
I'm not saying for a second that it's misrepresenting men. I'm just saying that I'm not sure about the approach it takes to suggesting that they're that men represent violence.
Sure, but I think that as I said, I think the balance is between saying whether this is something that's inevitable about men or whether it's something that's incredibly more statistically likely with men, because we see in Angel in the series there's an episode with an empath demon, and what he does is bring out the inherent misogyny in men, or releases their misogynistic impulses with no control. As you see a lot of the female characters in that series getting beaten and attacked by other lawyers, by Wesley stalks Fred around the hotel and all that kind of stuff. And there was a lot of criticism of this from what we would consider kind of men's rights groups, basically saying, my headcanon is that this demon actually had mind control powers and was puppeteering people to do it, because it's not fair to say that every man has this violence in him. And there was an episode of Twilight Zone, of the revived Twilight Zone recently, which is also about bringing out these dark impulses in men.
And the one character who says at the end, basically, he decided not to do it.
Yeah, and specifically, that was a gay character, but they also made the point of showing that his boyfriend did have these violent impulses. So I think my point is, I definitely get where you're coming from about having to strike the balance there, but I think what it turns on is whether you're saying it's an inevitable trait of men or it's a highly prolific trait in many men.
No, sure, no, absolutely. I suppose from my perspective, this is more a ontological issue I'm discussing. Is I'm not sure if you really boil it down to the point of so ultimately the episode is about how men have, or masculinity is often a violence. Mm-hmm. And that's a legitimate point. It's a totally accurate point in terms of the cultural social milieu, no doubt. I suppose I'm just saying I'm not sure if they're looking at the origin of that in a way that's useful for gender politics of both that day and today, just because so much of gender politics and feminism has moved away from essentialism in a way that would have been quite inherent in early feminism. And essentialism, for people who don't know, because this is one of those terms that's kind of moved on, essentialism is where someone believes that there are essential gender characteristics. So women, here's a positive one. One of the things that people often talk about around the philosophy of science is the suggestion that there's a very specific phallocentrism to scientific research in the past, because essentially if you only have men looking at a set of data, that they'll take a different interpretation to women. And the suggestion by a couple of people back in the 70s and stuff was that men would specifically lean towards single point results. So they would try to focus all their data points towards one single result or one conclusion, and women would find a more a less focused and a more nebulous result or conclusion.
Yeah.
And that's not something I would agree with, in the sense that I think that there's no essential characteristics within the person on the basis of their gender, but that would be essentialist reading of that issue.
Yeah, and it's similar to the way in, say, classically in video game design, they said that the classical or the essentialist view is that men prefer first-person shooters or games that have structured, linear narratives, whereas women prefer, say, social and broad games like The
Dating
Sims.
simulators and stuff.
Yeah, but not just necessarily on topic, but just, as you said, nebulous in terms of The Sims and things like that.
Sure.
And obviously that's generally been disproven in terms of, that's a self-fulfilling thing, where if you market these games and make them available and show, in the most basic terms, show men playing one kind of game and women playing another, because of the nature of herd and trend behavior, your data will corroborate that, but it doesn't show anything inherent.
For sure. I mean, like, look at Overwatch specifically. First-person shooter has a huge amount of women players, and not so much at the professional level, which is because of the culture around it. But like a huge amount of women players, because it's inclusive as a property as well as being marketed openly, because it's there's a bunch of women characters, and importantly, they're not all just healers. There's like women who are snipers, and women who are tanks who go around and
they share the various different roles on the team, essentially.
Yeah. And it's just like, when you're a woman and you're looking at this thing and you're not saying, oh, I'm shoehorned into one very specific thing, you're much more likely to engage with it. Because, you're not, the person who's made it isn't being a jerk.
Or, for example, with things like with Doctor Who being regenerated as a woman, women now have the capacity to see themselves as the Doctor, as opposed to previously they could only be his faithful companion.
Yeah.
And you actually have a trend now
of young girls dressing up as the Doctor, which is amazing.
You have a trend of young girls dressing up as the Doctor, but also of young boys and men dressing up as the Doctor, either as the female Doctor or as a gender swap version of it, showing that it's positive across the board to kind of open the way. So I think in terms of this episode, you can definitely see, looking at with the gradated view that we have of gender now and the experience we have, there's definitely nuances missed in some of the points they made. But I also am very cognizant of when this episode aired.
Oh, you're right,
and of the fact that they only had 40 minutes to make the points that they want to make. And I think they make some big swings and that connect in terms of how Buffy is treated, how Angelus does this whole thing where he's kind of stalking a girl who's in Buffy's class and kills her, saying her a message, and is very much the specifically not just a stalker but an ex-boyfriend who won't leave you alone. And then I think they do include a kind of a balanced portrayal of people like Giles and Oz, who show a different version of, like, Oz is a poster boy for the fact that he, they don't ever really revisit this idea that the werewolf is specifically a psychological monster as well, to the same degree. But he's a real poster boy for, he chooses not to engage with that behavior. So I think you definitely have a point about some of the notes that they miss, but I think they connect with a lot of big things as well.
For sure. And like, there's no perfect metaphor in these situations anyway. But no, in the season 4 episode, when he actually decides to leave because he's met Veronica, I want to say her name is, or Victoria. Veronica, who is another werewolf who has no problem engaging with her own werewolf instincts and goes out and like doesn't lock herself up and stuff. So and that looks at the psychology of it all, and it also takes it into another gender space. So
it's actually funny because they frame the werewolf as a specifically masculine thing in this episode, but the only other werewolves in the Buffy universe that are featured prominently are women. I
can think of Veronica, but who else?
In Angel, one of the main characters in season 5 is Nina, who's a werewolf.
Do you not remember the person at all?
Yeah, you wouldn't really remember. I often forget her, but she's a prominent character, and she's a werewolf. Angel has a bit of a flirtation with her. She's locked in a cage. It's the whole thing. I think she might be a child of the senior partners.
Oh,
but anyway, obviously, Oz's wife is also
Oz's wife.
If it's not from the TV show,
it's not from the TV show. He disappears after season 5 when he comes back from Tibet. He comes back from Tibet. He's no longer like a slave to the werewolf urges, and he wants Willow back, and Willow is now a lesbian.
Yeah, but then it must be the comics. Then they show that he met another werewolf, a woman in Tibet, and they now teach people how to control their impulses.
That's cute. So they're basically like ex-gays.
No, it's less that. Actually, I can't argue about that. Interestingly, although they portray in terms of the lore in this episode, Giles knows nothing about werewolves, and he actually believes.
Yeah, I thought it was so cute.
He believes the folklore about werewolves, and he's like surprised that they can hunt on more than just the actual night of the full moon. He's like, oh, me and my books have an exciting afternoon together, because they obviously speak about the disease, like a Sugo disease, lycanthropy in this episode, which is the werewolf disease, which does originally come from the mythology of the werewolf. Obviously, lycan being from the Greek for wolf, and anthropy for man, etc., or roughly that's the etymology. But in mythology, more broadly speaking, a lycanthrope can be any animal. It can be a were tiger. There's like weird ones like were otters and all different stuff. So was traditionally a wolf, and actually in Greek mythology is traditionally a full wolf, whereas werewolves are like these hybrid man wolf creatures. Sure, yeah. It can be a number of different animals mythologically speaking.
Oh, that's interesting. It's weird. Like there's no real werewolf text, is there? There's no traditional werewolf text, and there's no. Like, the werewolf, I think, needs to be revisited, because, I mean, there's obviously Teen Wolf was a big one recently, that's shit, but also a werewolf in Paris, and then there's Teen Wolf featuring Michael, what's his name again?
J. Fox.
Michael J. Fox from the 80s, but otherwise, the werewolf is reasonably underused, and especially in good fiction, there's very few good texts about werewolves. And what's the original werewolf text? I mean, Bella, what's his name again? From the 50s, 40s.
Bela Lugosi?
I think he did one of the, like, some traditional werewolf movie, but otherwise...
Well, some variation of the werewolf, like, it's from antiquity. There's been Indo-European variations, there's been Greek, there's Norse variations on what we could now amalgamate as a werewolf, in the same way that if you look at vampires, like, that obviously goes way back into... a load of different mythologies, specifically obviously European and Slavic mythology, but we're amalgamating things which could be treated, if they were real, as distinct animals. Like if you look at how vampires actually work in some of the Slavic mythologies, like they're not as we would construct them now. Yeah. But I think
but vampires had the locus text of being able to like basically see a cultural like touch point in Dracula and then spark out of that, you know?
Sure, but look how much more recent that is.
Yeah, sure.
Whereas they had some textual basis for hundreds, thousands of years before that. For werewolves, I think you're probably looking at something like maybe the Grimm's brothers, or around that kind of really kind of 1600s kind of European folklore. But in terms of modern culture, what I hesitate to call pop culture, I don't know. I think werewolves have generally been a B-movie concept, whereas vampires have had the luxury of being elevated in some ways. Like, sure. I think you could see a vampire film and you could, you have your interviews with a vampire, you could see something like that and call it quote unquote art puke, but like there's no
let the right one in.
Let the right one in, definitely. There's no great subversive or iconic werewolf text. Now, unless I'm missing something really
American
obvious.
Werewolf in London, I think we have to watch at some point, because the special effects are stunningly good, and I've never seen it. Apparently it's just a good movie, and it's supposed to be like a comedy horror, so I'm never going to say no to a comedy horror.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things, I think I start thinking synonyms for interesting. What I'd love to find out is where is the origin of this genre trope of werewolves versus vampires, because a lot of texts, lower budget and broader texts, construct this idea that werewolves and vampires have been enemies for centuries.
Specifically, most recently shown in What We Do in the Shadows.
What We Do in the Shadows, definitely, probably on a mass culture level. Twilight's probably the most obvious touchstone for a lot of people. Yeah. The one I always remember is the Underworld films with
what's his name? Kiefer Sutherland? Oh.
No, that's Lost Boys.
Oh no, I'm not thinking of Lost Boys. I'm thinking of Dark City.
Nothing to do with vampires or werewolves.
Oh yeah, I didn't watch it very much.
The one that I always go to is the Underworld series with Kate Beckinsale.
Oh yeah, sure.
From the early 2000s.
Whatever happened to her?
Vampire. She'd been doing these films for years, to be honest. But yeah, otherwise, I'm not really sure where it stems from. But it would be the interesting thing I always thought was in Buffy and Angel. Never a thing. There's never a werewolf faction. Yeah. And other than Oz, who is an outlier, there's never a werewolf character as such in this show.
It's possibly because there's not enough slimy darkness in werewolves. Werewolves represent a lacking of control and a kind of a tragic figure. And Buffy and Angel both trend more towards the demonic and the slimy, gross thing under the ground,
Yeah, well, see, the problem is that werewolves, and specifically in Buffy, lack agency. They're not responsible.
It's kind of the issue between Alien versus Predator, where they try to keep making that matchup, and aliens don't have that kind of agency or that kind of vocalization that they can really be put against this militarized alien species.
Was in it works. What I like about that is I definitely see the comparison to Alien versus Predator, but on a gut level, I would see the aliens as analogous to vampires and the predators as werewolves for no good reason that I can justify.
Well,
but if I had to categorize
the xenomorphs definitely do vampirism of their own, you know, in the sense of like, you know, impregnation and
transformation and sexual
rape,
to be honest, but sexual transgression, all this kind of stuff. And there's something a bit more. Actually, no, I know why, because predators are pack animals. There's all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's an interesting one. But
I definitely saw it the other way around. So looking at Oz, okay, I would definitely see him as a bit of a reconstructed man in this episode. He's very respectful of Willow, and he's very verbose. He stands up to to Larry and his croonies when he's saying kind of gross sexual stuff about Willow and Buffy in a casual way. And so in my view, in this episode, he's kind of taking on the mantle that Angel has left behind, because Angel to this point was the reconstructed man, the person with the desires to do a violent thing, who is able to shirk that off and be respectful to the women around him. So I thought that it was interesting that the episode after Angel loses that mantle, Oz does step in to basically hold the same load, which is the wanting to be a good person even though he has this like violence within him.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that Oz is a necessary replacement in the actual core Scooby Gang, because you get an imbalance in the dynamics there if you've too few people compared to how they constructed episodes where Angel was there to act in that role. And also you need a younger character to balance against Xander, because obviously Giles can't do that. So I think even just structurally in terms of how you write the scripts, he has a role there, but also everything he goes through with Willow necessarily can echo and emulate Angel and Buffy's relationship and various beaks of that, and how I love Buffy. I like Buffy Summers, think she's a good person, but she does have a protagonist's mentality that can sometimes be a little bit dismissive.
Definitely in the later seasons as well.
Yeah, and I think seeing those same beats play out with Willow and Oz, but with two people who I think ostensibly are probably more empathic and more considerate people, and less inwardly focused, is kind of an interesting comparison. But very specifically, like, Willow has to go through this thing of accepting Oz's monstrous nature, which is obviously exactly what Buffy does. And I think
there's also like conversation around killing him and like that being shirked off very quickly, which is the current conversation around Angel in this episode.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a nice funny moment where like Willow's talking about how hard it is not to have a boyfriend, and Buffy gets all bummed out over it, and she's like, "Oh, sorry, I shouldn't have." I was like, "Yeah, but the end of that sentence is I shouldn't have mentioned the fact that last week your 241-year-old boyfriend turned evil and tried to kill everyone." It's not quite as like casual as they try to portray it as. It's quite a serious traumatic thing has happened.
Yeah, but I mean, at the same time, I really like, one of my favorite things about this show is, even though I don't like him all the time, is any suggestion of Xander, Buffy, Willow together watching movies time. I think it only happens like 2 or 3 times realistically over the space of the show, the three of them just like watching a movie and hanging out. But in this episode, she says, "Oh, I was hoping we could all come together and do the tragedy, or what was it, misery thing? I think is what she calls it. Shared
misery, or misery loves company thing, or
yeah, sure." And
I think in addition to Oz's reference to Catherine being stuck in the trophy, they start to do more of this Buffy thing, where in this episode, Xander references that Willow fell in love with Moloch, who is the cyber demon, that he nearly got his head bit off by the mantis lady.
And when he's talking about Willow there, he says that Willow would still be the slave of Robbie the Robot, which is obviously a Forbidden Planet reference.
Yeah, the 1950s classic sci-fi film.
Which we watched.
We did, and I enjoy it. Robbie the Robot, the same robot, was also in
Lost in
Space, the original, yeah. But he also makes a reference to the fact that he turned into a hyena in the pack, and let slip the fact that he did actually remember everything he did. And Buffy was like, "You told me you didn't remember perving on me." And he's like, "Oh, let's change the topic." So they're really like, that's a deliberately. What's the other example we have of kind of a expression of toxic masculinity and sexual impropriety and
built into someone and being let loose?
That's linking in essentially, which I thought was like quite a good pull.
One thing to note about that reference to Catherine the Great, whose name I can't remember now, but from Witch.
What is Catherine?
Catherine, it was Catherine something though, but her the next episode is Bewitched, Bothered and Bewildered, which is the episode where Amy comes back, I think, and does the potion for Xander.
It's funny that they're already far enough in the show that they can start having references to their own mythology that they built.
Yeah. Actually, one of the things that I read about this episode that I couldn't actually spot in the episode is apparently at one point Buffy stands in front of a notice board, and one of the notices on it is actually thanking the messaging boards online for Buffy Vampire Slayer.
Oh, weird.
Because Buffy was it is the traditional huge online discussed TV show. It was the first TV show that really took off online and really had a huge amount of people paying massive amounts of attention to detail about it online.
Can I tell you an interesting fact I found out about Buffy?
Please.
While you get me a thesaurus, I, in the course of looking up something about Buffy, found out that the website TV Tropes, which is, if no one's ever been on it, it's actually a really
incredibly extensive
repository of, say if there's a trope of
Kill Your Gaze is a good one.
Kill Your Gaze, or the long lost twin brother.
Kill Your Gaze specifically, that trope is named by the TV Trope site. Yeah, as in, like, that's where it gets the name.
Hanging a lampshade, I think even growing a beard. Like, some of these are, if not named by TV Tropes, the website, were definitely codified by them. But yeah, say for example you plug in long lost twin brother, you can find every example of that, or a very extensive list of it across film, TV shows, games, etc. It started as a repository of references about Buffy.
No way.
Yeah, it started as a Buffy site and eventually outgrew that so because I remember I looked up the Buffy TV Tropes and they had a note saying this is going to be an incredibly featured and detailed section of our website because this is how it started.
That's mad.
Which I actually found while looking for other Buffy forums that are kind of still extant, to post about the podcast and get some more people listening and all that. And it's really just not a thing anymore. Just the forum thing. They're either archived or quite desolate, which is kind of sad.
It's kind of sad, but also forums were the worst.
People love forums. I know people definitely.
People loved fora.
Don't be that person.
No, I know.
There's people in work who do that all the time because we do a lot of forums in work. And it's like, yeah, you're technically right, but is it worth it?
You're not even you're not technically right. Correcting someone if they say forums is wrong.
No, but they say it themselves.
Yeah, if you want to say fora, you're being a bit cunty. Because
tell us what you really feel, Brian.
Like, forums is absolutely fine. There's so many different plurals about things that people are so nitpicky about that are so unimportant. Like octopuses, just say fucking octopuses. Octopodes is wrong. Octopi is only vaguely right.
Genii is one people say all the time as well.
Genii is just wrong though.
I think the thing is, and us being English graduates and being right there on the website, we do talk about this quite a bit. I think. Like, me and Brian correct each other occasionally. I don't know if that's ever come across on the podcast. And it's worthwhile doing if you can do it in a tone where it's like, hey, I don't know if you knew this. And it was like a positive aspect to it. But ultimately, it's never worth correcting someone's pronunciation or someone's grammar, because language is fluid and it's a living thing. And if there was some really pertinent example to it, I'm forgetting now, but if the thing is that so many people in the world start saying forums, that the word fora, for example, dies out, that is how language works, and forums becomes the correct way to do it. So there's basic text that tells you this is the gospel of how this is meant to be spoken.
Yeah, and things becoming bastardized and losing their original meaning and being transformed from the original meaning through use is a natural process of language, and it's good. It's and people often talk about this is a specific issue actually in the Irish language speaking community, because there's so much they had to battle against that to some degree, because there's so much
English infiltration.
English infiltration essentially, but you refer to it as bearlachus. So bearla is
the
English.
word in Irish.
The word
English
in Irish. So bearlachus is like English. How do you translate this?
Well, in the English language, the word you're looking for is anglicized.
Anglicized, yeah, sure. So
Englishification.
Englishification is actually probably closest. Yeah. So it's bearlachus, and you basically have to avoid it because it's so easy to just kind of like latch on to an English word that already exists.
I'm watching Brian
and make it into a
brain trying to switch between two languages right now.
Yeah, initially Gobber. But yeah, so it's a funny one. We should really get back to talking about this episode though.
Sure. So speaking of inappropriate language, Willow says some sexist things in this episode.
Yeah.
She says, because she's generally getting frustrated about Cordelia and Xander dating, which is consistent with her character arc. What I don't like is
Xander getting obsessed.
Okay, I don't think it's bad writing, but I think it's bad character.
Yeah.
We have done a close reading of this show. This is the first time he has ever paying attention to Willow in this context of getting jealous of her being with Oz and saying some really unfair things about Oz being dangerous and all this kind of stuff, purely because she's now unavailable. But Willow says about Cordelia something along the lines of like, you can reach Xander at 1-800 I'm dating a skanky hoe.
Something along the lines of, by which you mean you literally wrote down the words she said.
I did. And in a deleted scene when she's arguing with Cordelia, she says something along the lines of, oh yeah, you could be the girl next door if Xander lived next door to a brothel.
Yeah.
Like, wowzers.
Let's quickly talk about the Larry stuff, because we've gone on for pretty long at this point. So Larry...
Yeah, don't do a Griffin McElroy. It'll go on for as long as it goes on.
Larry is quite funny in this episode. As we were referring to earlier, there was a possibility that Xander was going to end up as gay, because it was either going to be Willow ended up as a lesbian or Xander ended up being gay.
Yeah, and we don't really know at what point that decision was made, but I would have to argue that maybe the episode where she gets her first serious boyfriend, maybe it wasn't decided by this point.
Oh no, it definitely wasn't decided by this point, because when she actually sleeps with Oz in season 3, there's no real suggestion of that there either. But at the same time, whereas Xander's losing his virginity is with Faith, and it's incredibly, what is it? Something bang, thank you, ma'am.
Wham bam, thank you, ma'am.
Wham bang, thank you, ma'am.
Okay,
that could be textually indicative. But
so basically, just to be clear, the arc with Larry is a school bully. He's really sexually objectifying to women. He has an encounter with Xander where there's a comic misunderstanding. Xander thinks that he's a werewolf. Larry thinks he's realised that he's gay. He eventually comes out to Xander because Xander implies that a similar thing happened to him, thinking he's talking about his hyena experience. And Larry then immediately goes on to be more self-actualised, polite to women, really thankful to Xander. Long story short, eventually dies. So
oddly, he gives out to Oz for dating a junior in this episode, indicating that he's a senior and would graduate this year, but he actually graduates next year with Buffy because he dies at the graduation, and he's in the next season, I think.
Yeah, I wonder if you could well, he's not in next season. Oh, he's in season 3. Of course, he's in season 3. I was thinking this was season 3 for some reason. Could you interpret what Larry says maybe to imply that he was saying that Oz shouldn't be dating a junior, but that he's also a junior?
No, because he would be wanting to date seniors if he's a junior.
Yeah, fair enough.
One thing that we need to note is that I've never noticed this before, but it's the case, and I looked it up, and it's the fucking case. Remember Hocus Pocus, the movie?
I do.
It's amazing. He's Ice, aka...
He is Ice.
What's his other name in it? It is Ernie. So he's one of the two bullies who has the word ice like shaved into the back of his head.
He is. Oh, yeah. This podcast has been so worth it.
Yeah, this is all leading to this point.
I'm very happy with that.
I know, yeah, me too.
A couple of problems with Larry. I'm not certain, and I've never been certain, how much this idea of the gay character is played for jokes. Not necessarily homophobic jokes, but for... it seemed like that he was a bully, but he's actually gay, and this whole thing with Xander. We can talk about that, and we can talk about whether Xander was potentially coded as could be coming out at this point. My main problem with Larry, aside from the fact that he eventually dies, I don't know if that's kill your gays, but he's portrayed as a homophobic or misogynistic bully who is actually secretly gay, which is something that is still a problem to this day. And even our darling sweetheart Chris Evans of Captain America fame has made a similar retort to homophobic people, saying, "Oh, well, you're probably just in the closet," etc. It's really systemic.
It's the thing of showing Trump and Putin kissing and being like, "Oh, well, they're probably gay." Actually, it's like
it can be one that and I say this with all sincerity, it can be quite difficult to get straight people to understand why that's a problem. But the problem is that the people who hurt gay people aren't other gay people, generally speaking. And there are other reasons why people are homophobic other than hating themselves. Yeah, and it's the suggestion that essentially the homophobia in society is actually coming from gay people is classic straight shit. Is oh, actually, it's your own fault. Thanks. And the problem is so often the people who make that analogy mean well. It's actually not something that homophobic people
you know what it is
say,
it's that kind of pernicious kind of homophobia that affects is kind of the equivalent of the male gaze in showing women in a certain way, and the perspective issue and the lack of a voice that women can have in texts. It's the same thing for queer characters, is that they so rarely have someone writing it that has any of that experience or has been informed of that experience. They tend to trend towards tropes, towards misinformed bullshit, essentially, and that's what's happened here. Is that definitely there's definitely a bit of a straight gaze happening here.
Yeah, and I suppose the idea is meant to be that Larry trying to hide his homosexuality is performatively acting as he sees other straight men acting, which is to be objectifying and rapey to women, frankly.
Which is so inaccurate in the sense that the vast majority of gay men who are in the closet are like quiet guys.
Yeah. And the other flip side of that is that there are definitely ways in which, you know, gay and bisexual men can be sexist, but it's not the ways that this portrays.
And like even just like showing the pinnacle of misogyny in this episode and being like, oh, this is how awful men can be, and being like, oh, lol, sorry, no, it's just a gay guy, like trying to put it on. It's like, no, probably the most misogynist person in this school is not a gay guy. It's probably a really gross straight guy who's probably acting on these things he's talking about.
Yeah, who'd be played by James Marsden.
Oh yeah, true.
And
James Marsden. Wait, James Marsden is Spike.
That's James Marsters.
I always get them mixed up.
Yeah,
but James Marsden always has a bit of a weird darkness behind those eyes.
Yeah. That's his Cyclops vision.
Oh, true.
So yeah, I don't begrudge there being a gay character. I think it's probably quite early for that to be on television, and he's not, you know, while he's a bit of a comic figure, he's, you know, I don't feel anything about the show as being homophobic or playing his sexuality for mean jokes. But it's not it's like if this character was on TV today, I would say sorry next. I mean, just, you know, that's not the representation I'm looking for, and the fact that he does eventually die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I think as one last point, what we need to look at is the Angelus stuff. So while
Angelus,
it's
pernicious, it's infectious.
Yeah,
it's hard not to do.
It sure is. So while Larry's out there playing toxic masculinity, Xander's out there dabbling in toxic masculinity, and Oz is out there resisting toxic masculinity, and Angelus is like Angelus is out there like killing people, really specifically torturing Buffy by killing her classmates, which is horrifying.
And yeah, so he basically kidnaps a girl from her class, specifically
with the like the register of a kidnapping, being like, "Oh, I know your friend. You should come with me. I'll bring you home."
Yeah, she hears a rustle in the bushes. You see, and I respect it and I appreciate it. It's an image that Buffy, as a TV show, returns to again and again and again, which is the woman walking home at night and being afraid of something in the dark, and that plays out in a number of different ways.
Yep.
But she hears something rustling. He appears as the kind of like kindly stranger. It's like, "Oh, you okay? You seem scared." And she's like, "So I heard something." And he's like, "No, there's nothing over there." And she thinks she's safe. I find that the way his makeup is done, he's portrayed in two ways. One is to really highlight his inhuman, pale vampiric nature, but he also looks a lot like he did when he first appeared to Buffy, back when he was a more mysterious character. And in terms of leading her away, specifically picking someone who's close to Buffy, someone who interestingly was in her self-defense class.
Yeah, sure.
Earlier in the episode, and that self-defense is kind of class is very much portrayed as a, you know, even though there's men in the class, the gym teacher is saying, you know, full moon is out, weirdos come out there, you know, it's all that language of having to defend yourself against attackers, and that disproportionately, massively is an issue for women rather than men. But he kidnaps this girl, kills her, and lets her come back to life, and her message specifically is I have a message for you from Angel. He says hello. I actually can't remember the exact.
I think it might have just been that Angel says hello or something like that.
Angel says hello, yeah.
One of the things that people were pissed off about online about this, and this is really weird. When I look at Buffy trivia, I look at a couple of different sites because a lot of them share the same things, but a lot of them will have one point only in one area.
Difference, yeah. I found
so one of the points about this episode was that people kept trying to excuse the fact that in episode 1 of Buffy, she's able to tell whether or not a vampire will come back to life just by glancing at them. And in this episode, she is able to, you know, inspect the body, and yet she still can't tell it. And it's just like, no one gives a shit. Fuck off.
Yeah, like I find that a lot when I start to write things initially, and I've tried to get over it as it's gone on, but you do fear about the things you kind of put into stone.
Yeah, sure.
Early on, and then you realize you can, as Joss Whedon often does, you can just say, don't worry about this fucking shit. Just watch the rest of it.
Yeah, it's the least important stuff there.
It's also a scene where we get Xander staking his first vampire unassisted, because he has staked one before when one was pushed onto him in the first episode. But he stakes Teresa with the condoling sign from the funeral home, which becomes part of the credit sequence going forward.
It does become part of the credit sequence, you're right. But yeah, no, Angelus is really... Angelus.
You're right.
Angelus becomes like a really specific. He's starting to show his big badness. He's starting to become an active, actual threat. Yeah, and he does represent the actual engaged, disgusting, toxic masculinity in this episode.
And he has aspects of gaslighting as well, because as he interacts with Teresa and with other people in Buffy's life going forward, he plays out this role of the abusive ex-boyfriend whom
is charming and
can gain access to your life through a presumed safety and a presumed benevolence, and just like, I know Buffy said that there was a danger, but it couldn't be me. Can I come in for a cup of coffee? And that's that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's the ultimate expression of the trick that patriarchy pulled over humanity, which is that men are supposed to be the safety thing, but they're also the thing that's most likely to attack you. So you need a man around to keep you safe. But realistically, that man is the most likely thing to put you in danger. Yeah.
Which is obviously what we're saying society says. We're not saying you need a man around to keep you safe.
Oh, yeah, no.
I do personally, so I'm very grateful.
Jill gets very scared of noises in the night.
Spiders and all kinds of things. It actually specifically reminded me of an episode of another podcast I listened to, I'll Kill Enough Filla, which is serial killers.
Great podcast.
And there's a couple of episodes about women who were... I heard that there was reports of men attacking, say, in the forest, and took I think it was specifically one where a woman was attacked by a man. Another man turned up and drove him off and walked her home, and the man who walked her home turned out to be the serial killer, and the other guy was just another man, which is just the
only in America though. In fairness, the
grossness of it is excessive, but like I found that very reminiscent here with just that thing of Angel is the kind of person who, if you saw him, he just seems so benign and kind that all your sensors will be saying this is a safe person. And the fact that he can emulate safety so much is one of the really horrific things about him. Even in the last episode, the way he was, whenever Angelus plays an Angel, I always find really upsetting. It's really kind of the call is coming from inside your house kind of stuff. Yeah,
you're not wrong. Let's move into the dusting.
Let's do that.
So, do you have any Buffy bits for us, Joe?
So,
one thing I'll say is that Willow at one point refers to being a werewolf as being akin to menstruating, and that wasn't comfortable.
Yeah, but I actually thought it was kind of an interesting point, personally.
Yeah, it's nice that she was comfortable referring to menstruation in front of her, getting her period in front of Oz. It was nice.
You don't get a lot of period jokes on television at this time or in Buffy, really.
Or ever, yeah.
But it's a good point, because they've constructed the werewolf as such a masculine thing, but the moon and lunar cycles and all that has historically always been associated with women and with menstruation and stuff like that. So
even when she says in the self-defense class, the loons come out of it during the... lunacy obviously being basically Luna being the moon, and lunacy being basically going mad because of the moon, but it's historically deeply connected to females and
linked to
hysterectomy and to the cycle of
hysteria, which is a fictitious...
Sorry, hysteria, not hysterectomy. Hysterectomy.
But it comes from the same root. Hysteria is a fictitious disease that men make up to control women, and explain literally that the reason why women were emotional and unreliable was because their uteruses were wandering around their body, causing infections in their humors, and therefore they had to be contained. Complete and fucking bullshit. But the moon is a very female concept in mythology, but it's associated with a very masculine monster.
Yeah, no, the moon is female, the sun is male, is traditional.
Yeah. Oz makes a joke about bunnies being able to defend themselves.
Yeah,
first bunny joke, and bunny's a real recurring thing in this show. He is wearing a weird kind of wavy checkerboard shirt at one point. It's like a checkerboard, but like not in focus.
Okay,
it's not a good look.
Are we weaving in and out of Buffy bits and fashion notes?
Yeah, it's all part of my Buffy bits package now, I think.
Okay, cool. Well, if we're talking about fashion, then we need to talk about Willow's fashion this whole episode, which is just the fucking worst. So at one point, Willow wears a canary yellow set of dungarees that are huge and way too baggy, which is just insane. Both her and Buffy wear woolly hats at different points, but somehow hers manages to be way worse and ribbed. It's a ribbed woolly hat.
Buffy wears a woolly burglar's hat whenever she patrols. It's a thing I forgot about, but it's really consistent.
At one point, Cordelia wears a Tommy Hilfiger jumper, and it's a really, really, really bad jumper. I couldn't believe how bad it was. It was like such a bad choice by Cordelia. It's like her worst choice fashion-wise so far.
There was a scene where Corey and Willow were talking, which doesn't happen very often, but Corey was talking to her about how Xander is an asshole, and I actually was happy it was included.
It was Cordelia talking about why Xander's an asshole because he was talking about Willow
while they're making out, which is a weird boundary crossing, which I wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
And there's a scene where the werewolf breaks into which I found quite funny, having done this podcast, because a lot of the episode takes place at Make Out Point. I don't call it that, but that's what it is. Teenagers necking in a car because the werewolf's attracted to sexual heat. And they're like, where else in town would there be sexual heat? It's like, the one other set we have, which is the Bronze. But after the werewolf attacks there, while they're having their debrief on the werewolf, there's like 6 staff from the Bronze just cleaning up the mess.
Yeah, that's true.
Which I didn't think was particularly stealthy. I will point out that when Buffy is dealing with Hunter King, she bends his shotgun and hands it back to him, which for me adds into my consistent Buffy hates guns thing. It's a really thorough thing, I think.
Another thing about just in terms of fashion, I thought Sarah Michelle Gellar looked awful in this episode. I think whatever they're doing to her eye makeup to make her look like a sad girl is not good, and she also wears her fringe back and it just doesn't look good. Don't like it.
Didn't compliment her bone structure.
No. One interesting Buffy bit. In 1990, Seth Green was in It. Do you remember which character he played?
No.
He plays Richie
Richie Tozier. Yeah. Does he?
He does indeed. And what's Richie afraid of?
No, actually, sorry, Richie's afraid of werewolves.
Yeah. So there you go. Yeah. So Seth Green played a character who's afraid of werewolves. Now he is a werewolf.
Oh, so it's all come together for him. Yeah. I thought that the line that Willow has at the end where she says, "I shot Oz," it just made me laugh.
Yeah, it was good.
Being gay made Larry nicer is one of my notes here as well.
It's true. And
there was a really uncomfortable joke, a really forced joke where your man is talking about, Hunter King is talking about selling werewolf pelts in Sri Lanka, and everything I've read as well has pointed out that the physiology of werewolves is really inconsistent in Buffy, whether you can skin them when they're alive, etc., etc. But Buffy refers to him as Mind Furrier. Yeah. It's like, Buffy, don't quit your day job.
No, it's not good. In terms of death count, there's only one death in this episode. It's Theresa, who dies and then gets staked. Yeah. She dies, she gets vamped by Angel, and then or Angelus, and then gets staked by Xander.
Yeah. And something that's really memorable for me from this episode, and I've never touched it on again in any way, shape or form, is the fact that Oz gets werewolfified because his younger cousin, while in human form, bit him while they're playing Tickle Fest or whatever. And
that leads to a great phone interaction with his aunt.
Yeah, it was like, "Hey, Aunt Marlene, quick question, is Georgie a werewolf? Huh, okay, how long has that been going on? Cool, okay, well, say hi to Uncle Ken," and that's it. There's another werewolf child somewhere here. Yeah. That is presumably like quite young because he just got his grown-up teeth.
Yeah, very confusing.
And it just never touched on again. And I think again, Oz is the harbinger of great, like, let's just paste over this moment. Let's just move forward.
He really does the Buffy register so well. He's so good at Buffy speak.
He really is, yeah.
Okay, so I'll give my rating for the week, if that's cool with you. Joel, is that acceptable? Am I allowed to? Okay, great. So I'm going to give it 7.6 single entendres out of 10. I think it was a good episode. It was really good fun. It was well written. It deals with the subject matter pretty well. And it's a good bridging episode.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I really should have thought of something.
Well, do you want to go for 1-800 I'm dating a skanky hose out of 10?
Sure, I'm going to go for 1-800 I'm dating a skanky hoe out of 10.
And how many of those are you giving it?
7.9 1-800 I'm dating a skanky hose out of 10.
Great.
I liked it. I agree with all your points. I thought it was a quite well constructed Monster of the Week episode. I thought it brought a lot of levity back, and I think it's important to show that we can continue to be funny now that we have serious plot happening. But I think the fact that it did directly address the mission statement of this podcast in terms of really upfront gender issues, both in terms of feminist issues, toxic masculinity, and also some sexuality in there, and just really being, okay, let's talk about this. Just bumped up just a little bit more for me, because I'm like, yeah, absolutely, let's talk about this.
Yeah, I did. Okay, well, that's kind of us for the week, I think, right?
Yeah.
Happy Pride Month.
Happy Pride Month. We'll probably talk about more about Pride actually next week after the fact.
I doubt it. There's nothing actually happens at Pride ever.
Or maybe this will be the Pride that everyone remembers. Maybe this is where it happens. This is when the rising
Maybe there's one where
begins.
someone gets killed.
Yeah, we'll talk about who were the first against the wall when the revolution comes. Did I ever say that story before about Wikipedia?
No?
I think I might have told it
You
on
have
podcast
told it before, yeah.
But back when Wikipedia was in its infancy and wasn't nearly as well moderated as it is now, my mum was like, "Oh, there's this new website which is like the encyclopedia." And I used to think it was one of those things which was
You're like, this is nowhere near as good as Encarta.
yeah, basically. But I looked it up and I typed in Star Trek, and someone had recently edited Wikipedia and said Star Trek is just like by virgins and nerds who'll be the first against the wall when the revolution comes. And I was offended. And I don't think if that was, when would that have been, 2000?
No, probably a bit later.
Okay, say it was 2003.
Yeah.
Probably didn't go back to Wikipedia to about 2010.
Yeah, sure.
I just completely swore off it.
This is Joel, who also for years was like, Doctor Who is not real science fiction.
I said that Doctor Who wasn't real science fiction and wouldn't deign to watch it. I also said that because I like Star Trek, I couldn't like Star Wars because Trekkies versus Warsies was a thing that I thought was worth dedicating some time to. And look how I've grown.
Yeah.
So thanks very much for listening. We will talk to you more about who was killed during the Prague Revolution next week. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Tell your friends, tell your funeral director. And until next time, end of this podcast episode. My name is Joel. This is also Brian. We are going to drink beer and watch TV.
And have Chinese food.
Have Chinese food, as has become our trope. And we'll see you next time on Buffy Boys.
Buffy
Boys.
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 See ya.
Oh.